In 1877, a rare record captures outlaw Billy the Kid, then on the rise in New Mexico territory, sitting at a table with members of his gang. As cards and coins circulated, the scene shows bonds of camaraderie and the idle routine between raids, when his fame was spreading across the Old West amid tensions with authorities. In 1892, in Michigan, a pile of American bison skulls was raised, a record of mass slaughter. The bison once roamed the plains, about 60 million, sustaining indigenous peoples with food, clothing, and shelter. For many native nations, it remained sacred. The westward expansion of the 19th century nearly wiped out the herds of the Great Plains. Around 1890, in an Alaskan brothel, two sex workers posed for a photo. In the context of the Old West, the rush for work drew crowds of men to the frontier. The demographic imbalance fueled brothels run by madams, who organized services, local incomes, and influenced urban economies. Patrick Floyd Jarvis Garrett, known as Pat Garrett, was sheriff of Lincoln County and gained notoriety for killing Billy the Kid in 1881 in Fort Sumner. Years later, on February 29, 1908, he was shot dead near Las Cruces, New Mexico. Many historians place him among the main lawmen of the Old West. In 1886, a family of immigrants reached the Nebraska plains after a long journey on trails and railroads. They carried trunks, a few utensils, and realistic hopes for land and work. The father watched the horizon. The mother organized the children and supplies. They settled near a trading post, the first step in local colonization. Around 1907, Apache leader Geronimo, a central figure of Bedonkohe resistance, is seen. Since the massacre in 1851 of his wife and 3 children by Mexican troops, he led successive attacks against Mexico and the United States, resisting the occupation of ancestral lands in present-day Arizona and New Mexico over the following decades. In 1886, James Brown Miller, known as Deacon Jim, was already working as a hired gun in the West. He charged between $150 and $2,000 per job. He preferred nighttime ambushes, hidden by a black coat, usually with a double-barreled shotgun, carefully picking escape routes. He is credited with about a dozen deaths in shootouts, which cemented his reputation. At the start of the 20th century, the main street of Manhattan, Nevada, bustled with miners, merchants, and wagons. Founded in 1867 after a silver discovery, the town was reborn in 1905 when gold drew a new wave of settlers. More than 4,000 people flocked to the district, building services, businesses, and housing in just a few years. In 1863, young Union cavalry officer George Armstrong Custer, newly promoted to General of Volunteers, appears during the Civil War in campaign. Years later, in the Little Bighorn Valley, 1876, he would be defeated along with his 7th Cavalry by Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, a landmark of frontier conflicts in the U.S. West. In 1890, in Nebraska, a farm family paused their work to record their presence in front of the windmill that provided water for their cattle and crops. The father kept his hat on, the mother held the youngest child, and the older ones lined up around them, showing the cohesion of life on the Great Plains. The scene reflects the agricultural expansion of the period. Around 1880, a group of men gathered in front of a saloon in Miles City, Montana. With ranch work done for the day, they spent the evening drinking and talking. In these growing towns, the saloon was a meeting point for cowboys, merchants, and travelers, a place to exchange news and find relief after long cattle trail journeys. Belle Starr, a notorious outlaw of the late 19th century. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley, she gained fame as the bandit queen for moving among cattle rustlers and train robbers, including Jesse James. Her biography combines sparse records and romanticized stories, sparking disputes over her crimes and her real leadership. Olive Oatman, captured in 1851 in the Gila Valley, then part of New Mexico, saw her parents killed by the Yavapai. She and her 7-year-old sister Mary Ann were enslaved, and the following year traded to the Mojave for blankets and a horse. There they received chin tattoos. Hunger killed Mary Ann. Olive was rescued in 1856 near Fort Yuma. Around 1900, Nat Love, an ex-slave who became a cowboy after the Civil War, posed in work clothes with a confident stance. Known as Deadwood Dick, He rode cattle trails and took part in rodeos. His story sums up the black presence in the West and the search for recognition and equality after emancipation between Arizona and the Dakotas. In 1890, at the end of summer, a Cheyenne family set up camp on the Montana plains. By a creek lined up teepees sheltered generations, grandparents preparing dried meat, parents fixing saddles, and children gathering firewood. Between visits from federal agents and hunters, they kept rituals and exchanges, adjusting to the pressure of the new regime. In 1890, in Oklahoma Territory, lawmen posed armed, a symbol of the authority that regulated growing towns and settlements. Their job was to stop crimes, serve warrants, escort prisoners, and secure elections. For settlers and merchants, they embodied justice on a frontier of railroads, makeshift courts, and land disputes. In 1875, Jesse James posed in a studio, already famous in Missouri for leading an armed gang, robbing banks and trains, and committing murders. With a high bounty on his head, the outlaw's fate was sealed in 1882 in St. Joseph, when Robert Ford, a member of his own group, shot him in the back, ending his life at 34. In 1879, Billy the Kid, born Henry McCarty and also known as William H. Bonney, was already a central figure in New Mexico Territory. Nicknamed for his youth and daring, he got involved in the Lincoln County War and was accused of killing Sheriff William Brady, making him a top target for federal authorities. In 1878, a busy street in Dodge City, Kansas, shows the daily life of the expanding frontier. Alongside Deadwood, the town gained notoriety for its concentration of saloons, gambling houses, and brothels, attracting gunmen and outlaws, while sheriffs and marshals with limited resources tried to impose order on the Great Plains. After a cattle drive in Kansas in 1880, cowboys paused their march and bathed in the lake. On the shore, other cowboys, horses, and a wagon can be seen. Saddles and tack lay on the ground. The routine of these Western workers was exhausting. Long journeys, heat, hunger, and thirst. The bath helped restore strength and prepare for the next stage of the trail. Around 1892, in a Pennsylvania brothel, a sex worker posed in a modest setting, among worn furniture and gas lighting. The scene captures the informal economy of the post-Civil War period, the moral oversight of industrial cities, and the precariousness that pushed women into the sex trade regulated by local authorities. In 1899, William F. Cody "Buffalo Bill" toured cities with his Wild West show. He had once been a buffalo hunter, scout, and soldier. In the show, fast rides, sharpshooting, and frontier reenactments reached audiences in Europe and the Americas, spreading a version of the conquest of the West. Cody also performed, expanding his fame. In 1908, in territorial Arizona, a group of hunters posed in front of a cabin at the end of a journey. They wore canvas and boots, carried repeating rifles, and displayed their kills on the ground. Beside them, hunting dogs waited. The scene shows frontier life, precarious housing, male camaraderie, and subsistence from local wildlife. In 1890, in the Old West, a gang of young men of African American and Indigenous descent operated in poorly policed frontiers. They committed kidnappings, robberies, and violence against women, moving across territories to escape the law. After months of searches, they were tracked across different counties, arrested, tried by local juries, and sentenced to death. Calamity Jane, Martha Jane Canary, around 1882, a figure of the Dakota Black Hills. She became known for her courage in riding and her marksmanship in confrontations, working as a messenger and guide during the gold rush, serving mining companies and detachments. Her fame spread through Deadwood and nearby areas, placing her firmly in the mythical pantheon of the Old West. In 1878, a shipment of buffalo hides filled the yard of a tannery in Dodge City, Kansas. The pile was the result of commercial hunting that, since the beginning of the decade, had slaughtered entire herds on the Great Plains. Hunters took only the hides, which they sold to middlemen, while the carcasses were abandoned and left to rot in the open. Ex-Sheriff Wild Bill Hickok, the famous Kansas gunfighter, served as marshal in Abilene and earlier as an Army scout in frontier territories. He took part in duels and arrests that marked the westward expansion. In 1876, in Deadwood, he was killed by Jack McCall while playing poker. holding the dead man's hand, an episode that immortalized him. Inside a saloon in Utah around 1980, a patron interrupted the establishment's routine to pose next to a horse brought indoors. The unusual scene for the time reflects the persistence of rural display practices in spaces of sociability, blending urban leisure with symbols of work in the American West.